So, oh, where am I clicking from? The laptop or here? So I'm a bit of a techno twit, sorry.
Just that one for moving the slides.
That one for moving the slides. Okay. Right. So, good morning, everyone. I want to begin by thanking the organisers for the kind invitation to present here today. It's really nice to be asked to talk about your work. I don't take any of it for granted, so I'm really happy to be here. I'm a senior lecturer in applied social studies at the University of Bedfordshire, and I'm an East London resident. So that is significant because of the type of research that I've done, but it's also quite challenging. I've now come to realise researching in the same place you live in. Right. As a lifelong music lover, my natural home is in sound system culture and in various forms of reggae, particularly dancehall. My work in general has a focus on music, contemporary Black British music to be precise, and it's at this conjuncture of art and life that it's possible to see how grime, UK rap and UK drill all work as art, literature and digital storytelling. But because of the ways in which racism operates, these forms and the people that make them are held to account, scrutinised and often demonised. So my aim has been to write and research in a way that doesn't objectify or deny the agency of the women and men who make music as art, expression and as a form of resistance. To try and resist writing about Black creative forms such as grime and rap as silos of badness. I take into consideration the cultural logics and the economic systems that are at play when we look at these formations of contemporary Black British music, which sounds very grand, but that's what I've tried to do. So that's what I want to talk about today, and to reflect on musical creativity and creative work in a newly gentrified area of Newham in East London. And most of the things that I'm going to talk about are themes that come from these two books. I've written other things as well, but I'm going to draw on some of the themes in these two books. So Terraformed, Young Black Lives in the Inner City, and Like Lockdown Never Happened, Music and Culture During COVID. But first I'm going to start by introducing grime, which probably doesn't need an introduction at this late stage. But in the beginning, when I did my PhD on grime music and entrepreneurship, and I started in 2007, and at that time it did need an introduction. And many times I was almost run out of town when I tried to bring it into places like this. So I'm going to introduce it gently because I'm sure we all know where we are. But just to say that it's a musical genre that began in East London at the turn of the 21st century, and I feel very, very old saying that. And there is some discussion about, well, what about South London? But for today, because I say so, grime began in East London. It's an East London thing. It sounds like where it's from, the street corners and council estates of inner city East London. Its sonic origins flow through the musical practice of the Black diaspora, namely hip hop, reggae, particularly dancehall, jungle and UK garage. It draws from an eclectic mix of sounds structured around 140 beats per minute. As a diaspora cultural form, grime has been nourished by its ongoing Black Atlantic connections to the Caribbean, Africa, and North America. Although it came of age in the YouTube era from 2005 onwards, grime's original stamping ground was pirate radio. And that was an opportunity for young DJs and MCs to put in their practice hours. Pirate radio stations played the music that young people wanted to hear in a way that they wanted to hear it, with requests, shout-outs, and information on upcoming events. Pirate radio had a certain vibe, it had a different energy, and so when the BBC wanted to take some of the staleness out of their output, what did? They set up one extra to emulate what the pirates were doing, often taking on former pirate radio DJs. But for the police and the regulating authorities, pirates were simply a criminal nuisance, as were grime events, which were often shut down. And so you can have a look at Form 696, which I'm not going to go into here, but there was a great deal of surveillance and control on grime events, and there was a kind of continuity with other events from Black musical forms. But technological advances made creating and sharing grime highly accessible. Think about those early camera phones. While the media was up in arms about happy slapping, young people were using their phones and SD cameras to make music videos that could be uploaded and shared on YouTube for free then, or broadcast on digital TV. So do you remember Channel U? Anybody? Channel AKA? I've one or two nods. Good, good. They're gone now, but at the time, it was possible to make a video for a small amount of money and get it uploaded for a small amount of money. So all of a sudden, your work can be shared very, very, very widely. And one of the things that the kind of early grime musicians were very good at was engaging with the social media and digital TV in that way. Platforms such as SBTV that was started by 16-year-old Jamal Edwards because he wanted to watch the videos and there was nowhere to watch them. So he set up a platform, and again, another way of people, young people being able to share their work. And in some ways, be responsible for their own musical career without intermediaries, record companies and talent scouts and so on, as well as the opportunity for allied businesses. So this, I'm suggesting, is partly what makes grime, the grime scene, an emancipatory disruption, because it allows for the possibility of creating new identities as artists, performers, and entrepreneurs. Its ecosystem also laid the blueprint, I would suggest, for later musical forms such as UK drill. And in a social and economic landscape that is beset by inequality, this is truly significant. And so one of the things when I was doing the field research for my PhD, I interviewed lots of young people who were involved in the grime music scene in some way or another. And most of them were not what the schools or the colleges would call high achievers. These were the young people that were not going to get the golden ticket and get into the great college or go to the great university. And so their identity often was one of, well, you're not a success. But in this field and in this realm, they were successful. The young people I spoke to were making CDs, they were making beats, they were creating music, they were creating platforms to share their work and so on. And I just want to turn to Newham now, in particular, to look at that kind of hyper-local context for grime and where it comes from, and one of the places it comes from, and what it does for young people. So Newham's a young borough. It's an outer East London borough. I have a map on the next slide, so don't worry. Next slide but one. So it's a young borough. By that I mean the average age is around 30. It's also very multicultural. 65% of the people that live in Newham claim a black or ethnic minority background. The multicultural nature of the area reminds us of the movement and migration that is part of Britain's colonial past. Newham, like many inner city areas, is a complex network of people who draw on these diverse cultural and historical backgrounds. More than 100 languages are spoken just in that borough alone. This confluence of people and place created an environment from which grime music could emerge and flourish. You can hear it in how it sounds, you can hear it in the language that people use, you can hear it in the lyrics, especially in the kind of early canon. And there is a symbiotic relationship between music, place, and community, which means that it's unlikely that grime can come out of a leafy suburb. The movement and migration that is a feature of this East London area contributes to a convivial musical practice. So, one of the things, as I said, in the early days, grime was kind of feared. Much in the same way that when people talk about UK drill now, it moves young people to violence. It's the content, the lyrics, the way people behave. But somehow along the way, grime has gone from being feared to now being lauded. It's so embedded in our everyday that we don't even notice it anymore, I would suggest. So what I wanted to, this one he said. the IKEA advert from 2020, I think, 2021. So it's that one. Thank you. I've got help. So this is DEE, who's I used DEE specifically. DEE was started off as one of the pioneers of grime. He was in a crew called Nasty Crew. Crews in the early grime days were very important. DEE was part of Nasty Crew. Then he left. There was some falling out with the wider crew. He joined. It became part of the Newham Generals. Again, very local, and he's continued. He's continued to be a very successful grime MC, recording artist, and so on. To the extent that when IKEA wanted an ad for their Christmas ad, we have DEE. So I'm just going to play that. But so you get the idea that something a sound and a genre that was deemed to be this kind of terrible influence becomes so mainstream that it's the IKEA ad. So moving on. As I said, DEE is from Forest Gate, which is the area of Newham that I focus on in Terraformed in particular. And in 2003, Dizzy Rascal won the Mercury Music Prize. And in so doing, he firmly placed Tower Hamlets on the map. But Newham is equally important in this story. So just some examples of some significant musicians from the area, all worked in various ways as recording artists, MCs, actors, Kernow, DJs on mainstream radio as well as pirate radio, and so on. And the area that I'm talking about, or will talk about, is Forest Gate, which is in the north of the borough. And there's a particular bit right at the top. All right, so you've got your bearings, you're in Newham now. Okay, so why does grime matter? Along the way, and despite some bumps in the road, grime becomes big business. Let me go back so you can still stay in the map. Grime becomes big business. By using English accents and therefore their own voice, grime provided an opportunity to step away from the elders in the UK garage scene, who at the time weren't really paying much attention. And so for a while at least, grime pushed back the US hip-hop and rap juggernaut, a little bit anyway. And from that comes a liberating aspects that can occur in a liminal space where young people can have fun as well as talk about their everyday lives, struggles and aspirations. Much of this developed out of a sound system culture that was the sonic background for many MCs. And when I interviewed many young people, and when you see interviews from people who've been in this scene for a while, they'll talk about how their elders, their parents, cousins, and so on, were musicians or singers, reggae musicians, part of sound systems, and so on. So there's a kind of continuity there as well. This music didn't just kind of fall out of nowhere. There's, as I said, there's an ecosystem of live performance and events, as well as the production and sale of music and merchandise. And with that, grime shares a kind of continuity of practice with sound system culture. Why grime matters in Newham as well, in particular, is as well as being a young borough, it's historically poor. And it's been that way for a very long time. There's high youth unemployment, poor quality housing, and after the global financial crisis in 2008, Newham had to, like many places, had to make cuts to its services, and youth provision was hit very hard because it's one of the things that you can cut very easily. So the youth services were one of the places where the making of grime could happen. So it was the corners, it was the youth centres, and just being young people being in community with one another. So Newham cut 70% of their youth services, and with that went some expertise as well. So it wasn't just the place; it was the expertise of the workers that went with it. But more recently, in the last 8 to 10 years or so, this same Newham historically poor, on its knees a lot of the time, but getting on with it becomes very desirable. Some aspects of it become very desirable for a number of reasons. Crossrail, which is now the Elizabeth line, runs from Shenfield to Reading and to Heathrow Airport. And Forest Gate and Maryland are on the Elizabeth line. That's one reason, it's one of many. But all of a sudden, this place, like many places that become gentrified, shift from being, a place to be a little bit scared of to somewhere that's more affordable than Hackney or Shoreditch, and a place where people want to live. It's relatively low cost if you have money. So gradually, now at the beginning I said, I live here. So, but gradually, without me noticing, this multicultural area that I'd grown up in, that I'd lived in and grown up in, began to change. So when the corner shop started selling organic, freshly squeezed orange juice for $5.99 a bottle, I paid attention. Sociologist, you see, amongst me. So I'm saying to the guy in the corner shop, what's going on here then? And he said, well, the customer base has changed over the last couple of years. New customers wanted organic produce, they wanted high quality foodstuffs, and these came with a hefty price tag. What did he have in there the other day? Was it an artichoke and truffle pizza? something like that. And but at the same time as this kind of widening in tastes and goods and services, the average income in the area hadn't increased. Young people in the area were still without jobs or in low-paid work. Where's the work for young people that live in Newham? Health, care, retail. So what I started to think about then was, well, Newham's an East London borough, so these are where some of the ideas came from for Terraformed, and it's about 5 miles from the City of London. So I started to play with this idea of juxtaposing a square mile of the city with a newly gentrified square mile in Forest Gate in Newham. So I've got somebody to draw me a map. So these pictures I'm going to show you, they're all in Terraformed, and I've got 2 bits of film as well because I couldn't share the film. But here's the first picture. So because I live there, every other day, I'm exaggerating, but very often I'd get this kind of estate agent material dropping through my letterbox because Forest Gate becomes a desired place to live. The council starts to rebrand the High Street, which is Wood Grange Road, as an urban village. And the roads off and the little blocks of council flats off, these are the Badlands now. These need to be cleaned up, and we can't have young people hanging about the streets because it doesn't give the desired image. So every so often I'm getting estate agents' leaflets that look like this, Forest Gate as a village, or not all of Forest Gate, this bit of Forest Gate as a village. And it looks lovely. And it is lovely, because as I said, I live there. But look, if you look closely on the map, there are 3 exclamation marks. A red one, a yellow one, and a blue one. Each of those exclamation marks shows a firearms incident. So in one, a 14-year-old schoolboy had a fatal gunshot wound to the head. It made the national news, I think, for a week or 2 because he was so young. And then the world moves on. And they haven't found, despite lots of effort, they haven't found the person that did it. The second exclamation mark, which is the Clare Gardens one, so CJ Davies is the 14-year-old, that's Booking Road. Clare Gardens, exclamation mark, a young man a 25-year-old man experienced life-changing injuries after a drive-by shooting. All of this is in the urban village. And then the last one, Dames Road is, that was a police chase. So the police had chased a car from a couple of miles away, opened fire on this car, and the police chase ends up there on Dames Road. And what was interesting was that how this was spoken about and discussed on social media, especially the last one, depended on which part of the community you were in. But I'll come back to that. So that's the area that I'm talking about. The next picture, right, so the postcode for Forest Gate is E7. E7. And this was a new estate agent in the area. And so 7 reasons to live in E7. I thought, oh, great. And you can just about see walk the dog, stroll in the fog, and so on. All of these 7 reasons you can tuck into a hot crepe as you browse the stalls at Woodgrange Market. That's also in the off the high street and the strap line. Why live anywhere else? But what's missing? What's missing from the E7? Why live anywhere else? Is the multicultural nature of the area. And then I thought, well, don't judge. Look at the other side. 7 more reasons to live in Forest Gate. The epic Epping Forest, an abundance of glorious Victorian terrace houses, regeneration schemes, transformations, home to a profusion of creative professionals. They don't mean DEE. Those are not the creative professionals. Get familiar with the Nude Coffee, only 13 minutes from the city on the New Elizabeth line. Why live anywhere else? So the next one. So one of the things that I did for Terraform, I thought, well, all these places are here. I haven't actually been in any of those. So I did my kind of local ethnography, and I went into all of the new places that are kind of appearing around the urban village. And this is the gastropub. It was called the Railway Tavern, and the last time that I'd been in there, I went to see a reggae band, and then it had been rebranded. So again, there's a kind of look and a kind of pastiche of poverty, mismatched chairs, mismatched cutlery, maybe a chipped plate, all this kind of stuff. But that's that and in order to be in community, because there are very few community spaces now, you have to be a consumer. You have to be in these places. You can't be on the corner and there isn't anywhere else to go. So you have to be in these kinds of places. Same pub. So the price of entry, the minimum price of entry to be in community with other people is £2 for a sausage roll, if you eat sausage rolls. Scotch eggs, £2.50. And again, this kind of throwing back. So the £2.50 fashion to look like the kind of old money. It's this strange idea of the old and the new in this urban space, which gives the impression or the feeling that it's for some people only. Next one. Right, so remember, Newham, I made a really big claim at the beginning, which I can back up with lots of literature about Newham being one of the birthplaces of grime, one of the places where grime came out of in the early part of the 2000s, all of these very significant grime crews and so on, and how that's changed the landscape of popular British music, definitely. So I'm in the pub. I had to look for this clip. I'm in the pub, I'm in the gastro pub, and they've got live music. So now we're going to hear some. The birthplace of grime. Let me move to the next slide. So I think it's a double bass. I thought it was a cello, but that's the sonic, that forms a major part of the sonic landscape of Forest Gate now, because in order to make other sounds, the surveillance and control is quite different. It's quite different. Let me move on. As I said, the postcode for Forest Gate is E7, so there's another E7 literally under your feet. So these young people have staked their claim to a place, they've carved their names into the concrete. Jamal, Jamie, Lewis, Kyle, Anthony, and so on. And I took this picture in 2018, and it's been there for years, years and years and years. And last year I walked past, and it's been paved over because there's a new yoga studio under the arches. So it's gone. It's gone. Next one. So the police chase that I spoke about on the first slide that ends up on this corner. So this is where the police, like a high-speed chase through these residential streets that ends up with the police shooting out this back window of a car. And I'm nosy. So I hear all this going on, and there's more police than usual. I mean, it's very, very, very loud. And it's about 11 o'clock. So I've gone to the shop, walked to the top of the road, and there are so many people. Everyone's out of their house. This is just one segment of the image, and you can probably count 13 or 14 police officers. They're all armed. And the crowd is behind me, and there are at least 50 or 60 people there, and it's very, very quiet. So the lights are flashing, and the ambulance is there, but the ambulance is not. And so there's all this speculation behind, are the people alive? Where are the people who are in the car? What's gone on? Somebody turns up because they think they know the person. It's the energy is very, it's very, very strange, very, very heavy. What I couldn't show in the book was what that felt like, what it sounded like to be there. So I'll play, I think I can do this myself. Let's have a look. The whirring is a helicopter. And when I was saying before about it was interesting to watch the kind of dialogue and discussion afterwards, because this was a big incident. It was a big incident. So the people that they arrested got between 21 and 23 years. The young men that were arrested at the scene. So it was big, and the helicopters were there for quite a while. But what was interesting was that in some parts of the community, people felt safer. Oh, the police are here now. The helicopters are here now. Wasn't quite the discussion in other places. So, as I said, I've focused on Newham in general, Forest Gate in particular for Terraformed, and the book came out in 2020 just as lockdown had started. And so the next book, unintentionally I think, was about COVID and lockdown, not specifically looking at Newham, but thinking about Newham as one of those places that in the early parts of the pandemic was part of what they called the COVID triangle. There were 3 boroughs in London that had higher rates of infection and higher numbers of deaths, and it was Barking and Dagenham, Redbridge and Newham. So those inequalities were brought to the fore by COVID. And so even as many aspects of life moved online and we consume music in various formats, those kind of sonic events offered a much needed social connection. And Kernow, who's a recording artist, an MC, but also an actor. Have you watched Top Boy? Kernow is Sully in Top Boy, another Newham luminary. I'll just add that here. But he did, during lockdown, he did a series of online events called Newham Talks, and it was to fundraise for various community organisations in Newham. So we have that kind of community and musical connection there as well, especially in a time of crisis. And so I'm getting there. What I'm saying is the global pandemic served as an interruption in time, a serious crisis that revealed stark social and economic inequalities. Contemporary neoliberal capitalism always employed division and injustice in terms of how work is rewarded and valued. But COVID-19 made it impossible to ignore those vast economic differences in the everyday lives of the well-off and those on low incomes. Rap, in its many iterations, is a ubiquitous soundscape. Through the production and consumption of rap, grime and UK drill, communities from ends have been narrating their everyday reality for decades, if we'd care to listen, articulating how life in the UK takes place often within the contours of austerity, racism and police brutality. So to conclude, and I hope this video works, but anyway, as one of the birthplaces of grime, Newham remains for the most part a disadvantaged area. Recently, Newham was in special measures. It has an ongoing housing crisis. It has high levels of homelessness. Most people, they even say on their website, if you apply for social housing, you won't get housed. It's just not going to happen. Austerity and COVID-19 exacerbated enduring inequalities. Gentrification renders poorer communities out of place and raises questions now of what music can be made in the manor, who gets to make it, and what kind of sound is allowed. Living with and through economic uncertainty may dull our capacity to imagine new worlds. In this talk, I've reflected on the importance of creativity, specifically making, listening to and sharing music. How and where the music is made reflects the divergent spatialities of inner city environments. Grime and rap both work as art, literature and ethnography in creating a sense of belonging. Social interaction fires the geographical imagination and allows for a sonic imagining of place. Music becomes a force that defines place, and for Black youth in particular, it's enhanced by Black Atlantic flows that fuse together the local, the national and the global. And so despite the privations and challenges of inner city life, young people continue to make music that matters for them, forging connections across time and space. So I'm going to end there with the video. So this is another rendering of Forest Gate. SBTV did a series a few years ago where they asked various musicians to, well, talk on their place really. So it's called Better Place, and Bassman and Snizzy did Forest Gate, they did E7. There are many, many of them.
So we've got some time for some questions. So has anybody got anything they wanted to kick us off with? Because I've got some stuff I'm going to ask. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I just wondered whether, because you've kind of got obviously two communities living in the same place now, and I wondered whether, as far as you can see it, there are any points of crossover between those two, or whether they are almost entirely parallel.
That's a really good question, and I did the research for the book probably 2018, 2019, and I have thought about that because somebody's asked many people have asked me that question in different ways, and I thought that those points of contact, because it's not those points of contact would come with the very young, at schools, primary school, secondary school, and so on. But what appears to have happened is that with the primary school, so when I walk into the station in the morning, there's a primary school that's in the Healthy Streets bit, which has been deemed has the Healthy Streets initiative, and there's the primary school in the other direction, the blue school and the red school, and the children that appear to be going to the red school in the Healthy Streets are from the newer communities. They don't seem to be going right, which is the nearest school into the blue school. So it's got to cut that mixing has got to come from somewhere, but I'm not sure where. I thought it would be schools. The youth centres are starting to open back up again, but that's secondary school age. Yeah, I'm not sure. Somebody challenged me and said, well, you can't say that these are parallel worlds because people must cross over at some point. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. I don't know.
It's really interesting talk. Thank you. I was wondering, like regeneration doesn't last forever, right? So I live near Brixton, and have lived in and near Brixton for 20 odd years. And I think the kind of the regeneration bubble or the gentrification bubble is kind of it's either kind of bursting or it's burst around Brixton. And I was wondering what happens to that culture that's been displaced once the kind of gentrification bubble has kind of burst. What's going to happen? Like say Newham, will that sort of original culture sort of start creeping back in again? Or will it kind of, what happens to it? Because you're left with a kind of space where, you know, there's been a sort of eradication of all culture.
I mean, it's a really interesting question. So one of the things that happens is that people do get displaced for one reason or another. And so the question is, does the music and the creativity travel with them to wherever they go? And I think there is some scholarship on that. Natalie Hyacinth did some work on reggae in the outer boroughs, but also as well for younger people. I think that a lot of that creativity happens online, not face to face, and that has its own challenges, I think. But it's a very good question of what happens when that particular era moves on. What happens in those places and to those places. And I can't imagine now in the place where I live that grime could happen in the same way now. There is nowhere for young people to stand about. You can't stand about. You get moved on. Someone will move you on. You can't stand outside the supermarket, the security guard will move you on. You can't stand there, the police will move you on. The secondary school in the bit of Forest Gate that I live in, you're not allowed out at lunchtime anymore. They have to stay in. So the places where you can be out and have that, whatever it is that you need to make something, you know, not under the watchful eye of whoever, those places are few and far between. So it is a good question, and I have thought about it. I have no answers. I've got no answers. I'm just here.
Well, it's interesting because in the book you sort of write about that period of lockdown and sort of Black British music online, and how a lot of the communities that sort of congregated in those spaces online and sort of made those spaces online were adept at it because, as you say, they'd already been moved out of physical spaces. They already had this kind of online very social presence because those physical spaces that were in the community had already been lost even before that.
And I think that's one of the wonderful things I think about Black British music is that being able to be so flexible and to adapt to different circumstances. So, for example, when grime was new, it's not anymore, but when it was new and it just used to get locked down all the time in London, you couldn't put on a grime event in London without something happening. And then Form 6960 did, you had to declare who was on the bill, their full names, not just their performing names, and were they going to be performing were they going to be performing lyrics over a recorded beat? You know, who do they mean? But anyway, what certainly wouldn't have been the person playing the double bass in the tavern. But what happened was that they couldn't perform in those places and moved that. So places like Milton Keynes, Northampton have got these huge grime communities simply because couldn't do it there. Okay, we'll move then. we'll do it somewhere else. And because technology had advanced in such a way, what happened to garage didn't happen to the grime. It didn't disappear. It just continued. It's been overtaken by other popular forms now, and that's all right. But it didn't get squashed. So, but yeah, that ability to adapt and be flexible is quite the thing.
Kind of jumping on all of that, and the sort of migration online as these like communities get dispersed and that kind of thing. Obviously, like at the time when grime is popping up, I feel like one of these platforms that young people were using to sort of communicate and create things online, it was more of an open frontier where everything felt a bit more neutral. You know, YouTube, sort of pirate radio, going digital, whatever. In a way that, like, especially post lockdown, my experience of any kind of social media or sort of like, you know, media sharing platform is that they're a lot less neutral than they used to be, and you can feel the sort of the watchful eye or the corporate interest kind of governing things. Things don't necessarily find their audience organically. There's like algorithms and sort of other interests sort of directing those into like people's attention in particular ways and that kind of thing. I guess pulling on that, thinking about youth centres reopening in places like Newark or in Lambeth or wherever and that kind of thing, like I wondered if you had any notion that like there might be a shift away from online back to another way of sort of connecting and that kind of thing, that like online is less of the sort of like blank sheet for young people to like express themselves and link with each other and that kind of thing, and whether whether you had any sense of where that might go.
Yeah, I mean, you raised some really good points there about, well, because online it's no longer that space where you could, you know, if it ever was, that you could organically upload your track and then it would take off, this kind of thing. Everything's so carefully curated, and I think you're right that in lockdown people probably became more aware of just how curated and ordered all of that stuff is. And I think there is a kind of there feels like, and it looks like this kind of a move towards having the outside face-to-face interactions again. Have you seen DJ AG online? Have a look. If you're on Instagram, look for DJ AG online. And so what he does, so he's from South London, and he's a DJ, so he'd roll up outside Brixton on that corner, if you know Brixton, where Iceland is, and people would just show up. They'd show up, so he'd DJ, and he would show, and people would show up, and they would MC or they'd sing, and it's got bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, he moves to King's Cross. Sometimes he's outside the O2. He can tell his own story about the amount of times that he got letters from the Metropolitan Police and so on. It's so big now. He had Ciara outside King's Cross a couple of days ago. I mean, it's incredible. But I think it is that thing that people want to be outside and be part of something that's, you know, that's not a screen. You know, there's a breathing person next to you or in front of you. You're having to kind of move someone out of the way to see it, to see and feel something. And then DJ Mac 10, who was in Nasty Crew, was one of the kind of original grime DJs. Something very similar out there with his decks, playing in various locations, and this crowd just kind of building behind them. And I think there is an appetite for events that are kind of in person. Because even now you cannot be spontaneous anymore. Everything's booked in advance. Subscribe online. That I'm from an era, you know, the grey hair might fool you, where you could just turn up somewhere. If you wanted to go out, you went out. You can't do you. It's very difficult to do that now. Everything's planned.
Got one more at the back, if that's all. Maybe try and squeeze two in.
Really interesting talk. So you were saying about how UK drill is kind of the newer sort of scary sort of music, and of course grime has become very mainstream. Do you think UK drill is going to? Do you think it has the potential to reach that same level of mainstream, or is it going to sort of remain a sort of?
I think it's already there. I think it's already crossed over from that. You know, this is you know, those conversations still go on, and the consequences of making UK drill are still there for many young people. You've got some young people sitting on some very big sentences because they're in a music video, and it's got a drill soundtrack. Those things are still of consequence, are still around. But in terms of the music as a form and how it sounds, it's become pop. It's just there to the extent you, the Asda ad a couple of years ago for children for school uniform. For school uniform, it was a drill beat. Look it up. Arrive like you mean it. Georgia Asda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a drill beat. So, and all of the kind of, all the aesthetics, all of those things are just kind of so part of the everyday that the sound has made the crossover, but the consequences and implications for young people, especially young black people from ends that make drill or participate in drill in any way, are still horrendous. And I'm not taking away I'm not minimizing any of the real life harm that people come to, but at the same time, you know, two things can be true at once at the same time. Some young people have suffered, really suffered, and continue to do so because of music. Stop it, Joe. Stop.
No, that's good.
Don't
It's
rant.
great. No, that's great stuff. Just one here, yeah.
Hi, Joy. Thank you for that. I was really struck by you mentioned at the beginning being situated in the place that you're doing your research. And I guess you've lots of videos where you're kind of recording things as and when they're happening, I guess, and collecting all of this data. Could you speak a little more about that? Like, is it hard to kind of grasp the thing that's constantly evolving in front of you?
I think what was at the time when I was doing the work for Terraform, I was in quite a strange space. Anyway, so I collected all of this stuff because I'd applied for various fellowships, and then some terrible things happened. So I was quite angry when I wrote that book. I was in a state of rage. And so I was, you know, trying to make sense of, the world that was around me, and trying to make sense of, how did we get here then? How did we get here? What was the point of all of the things that we thought we were doing? And here we are, and it's still terrible for our young people. Like, what is going on? So I was just, walking, thinking, taking pictures, talking to people, that kind of thing. And that's what it became. When I think about it now, I don't know if I would, because it is very, very close to home. I mean, people were tapping me on the shoulder in the co-op. It was like that. And I didn't expect, because it came out in lockdown as well, and I just wanted to just kind of work out some things for myself. I didn't imagine that many people were going to read it, and they did. And so I did have, and I am quite reserved, I'm just not. This is not for me. So I think one of the good things about recording in real time, even if you don't know whether you're going to use it in any way, the record is always there. So when I took the picture of that paving slab, I didn't know they were going to pave over it. That had been there for so long. If I hadn't, I would have been telling you about it and just say, believe me. So it is good to have the record, the archive. The other thing about the archive, I forgot about this, look. So one of the things that I've been doing ever since I started doing the field research for my PhD is I have an archive, and the photos, the interviews, the merchandise, it's all part of an archive, which I must do something with one day. Here's my DEE, my DEE t-shirt that somebody designed. So I've got this archive of stuff that includes event tickets, merchandise, and so on, as well as the kind of sonic and the visual recordings as well. I think it's just important to document it, whether it goes anywhere or not. That's what I would say. But stay away from your home.
Right, that's a nice place to end. I'm sure the conversation will continue. Great way to start. Thank you very much, Joy.